Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Fekrat.
My name is Melody Shadinlil.
My name is Ayeneh.
And on this episode of صدای دانشجو, we'll be tackling an aspect of the pre-med application process that is neither surefire nor guaranteed. This isn't any of the AMCAS activity sections or your guaranteed GPA MCAT score you need to apply, at least we think. And no, in fact, this is the topic of gap years. So some students opt to do the straight and narrow. Some students may opt to do the increasingly traditional and supplanting the old tradition 1 to 2 gap years. Others may even go into the 3 to 10 plus to varying degrees of positionality in the chronism. That is to say, before or after college even. We're thinking things like military service and the lot that take a lot of years, perhaps even transitioning to medicine from a different career path. If this sounds like you, this conversation also applies to yourself, even if you're already through the application process and care to listen on what students of our generation are thinking of this. So ourselves, Melody and Ida and myself, what do we think about the straight and narrow? What do we think about people that go straight through? So you're taking the MCAT sometime between your sophomore and junior year, right? This is like the traditional pathway. And then you're applying in your junior year. And then by your senior year, you already know where you're going to go. So we have a friend, Bobak, who did this, and he went straight through. What do we think about that?
I think that everyone has their own path, and honestly, I planned on going straight into medical school. I finished all my lower division courses as soon as possible, so I could.
Do you think most people plan to go straight through? We all set out to make that possible?
No, actually, I think some people plan on gap years. I know for me personally that I think it's the opposite. People plan to take a gap year and it may increase. But for me personally, I planned on going straight ahead. I really tried my best to get all my prereqs out of the way, my lower division courses, and then I wanted to study for the MCAT sophomore to junior year. But life happens, it's okay. I had to come to terms with the fact that maybe, I'm not gonna go straight and I am gonna take a gap year. And it's partly because I felt like I didn't have the experience that I thought I needed, and I wanted to work more on my application, make myself a stronger applicant. But also at the same time, I wanted to give myself more time and grace. I didn't want to feel that rush. But it really varies for everyone. I think everyone is on their own path, and there's not one path that is better than the other. I know some doctors say take a gap year. Gap years are good. Find yourself in that 1 year period, 2 year period. But I really just do think that everyone is on their own path, and it comes down to what's best for you.
From memory, I believe Emory University has recently put out their opinion articles about gap years, exactly that, and they actually encourage it. So from the medical, that's their medical school. Mm-hmm. So from the medical school perspective, the admissions committee, I wouldn't say that by and large they consider gap years to be a sign of distraction, or it really just depends on what you do with those years, and we'll reiterate that in different ways. What do you think about the straight and narrow process, just face value?
I think, to kind of add what Melody said, and I agree with a lot of those points, it really depends on the person. You have to kind of take a step back, look at your application, because honestly, the med school process is really difficult. There's a lot of things that you have to do while you're maintaining your undergrad courses, studying for the MCAT, volunteering,
you include that in things you have to do.
Right, and a lot of schools have certain expectations, research, a lot of schools do kind of expect research in there. Not always, but if you look at the stats, a lot of applicants that are accepted have all of these various things. So it's kind of taking a step back, looking at what have you done? Where are you at? Are you, for example, happy with, your GPA? Do you feel good about your MCAT score? Things like that. If you're not happy with your GPA, then you might want to consider, a post-bac program, right? Something that helps,
Most of those are about a year and a half.
Yeah, about a year or so, right, and that we're kind of going into the conversation of what you can do during your gap year, but I think the straight through path works for some people, and it might not work for other people. Of course, it really depends.
Here's fun.
If you can do it, all power to you.
Do we have any stereotypes of what's the kind of person that goes straight through? I think there are so many factors that go into the straight through to grad school. Maybe not undergraduate, because I feel like we're more, in our culture in the United States, we're more inculcated to that by our peers, by our counselors, who are more, at least in my public, high school experience, we were more engaged or more invested in our experience, especially getting the fact that we had to have it in our minds that college was an option, right? And the preferable option to trade or something else, going straight into work. And I think especially because in my class there were so many of my peers, for example, that wanted to go to college, that sort of mentality didn't exist. It didn't translate to college. Once you get into college, then it's like you're surrounded by so many different people, so many different trajectories. Sure, like many set out to be pre-meds in those first 1-2 years they want to go to med school, but we know that a part of the excluding the attrition bias, the actual attrition rate to medical school, and really including what is regularly biased by the attrition, is those 90% that set out in the beginning to go into medical school may not even end up hitting the apply button for various reasons, including, that's not even to say that ones that want to go into graduate school or they want to go straight into a job with their undergraduate degree. So many different avenues that people want to take, or they want to take gap years just to explore themselves. I've heard a good deal of stuff like that. What do you think about the effect of other students? So when you're already in college and you set out to go on that straight and let's play like a little game, perhaps, if this isn't all us that we want to play the straight and narrow, or we didn't set out to do that. You go into college and you want to do this straight and narrow. What factors, or even in your experience, if you could attest to it, affect your mentality, right? Do you think that other students had a big effect on what you wanted to do, like your timeline? Like sort of these unspoken, the hidden curriculum of school is the socializing that we do. Once we get there, students maybe are disillusioning us. You hear from the psychopathic gunners that they're trying to dissuade people from going to school. I don't know, some silly stuff like that I've seen, with regards to this topic of the straight and narrow, the time scale, the timeline. You guys follow? What do you think about that?
It's an interesting question. I think that, I don't know, you can kind of answer it in different ways. If are you thinking about comparison in that sense, or
Sure.
the lack of the fact that everyone's going for one thing, so it's more competitive?
We naturally make the social comparison. Social comparison aside, with that which is forced on you, not forced, not unwanted. Maybe you have friends that have a different mentality than you do. Oh, I want to take, I don't really know, I'm pre-med. A lot of that stuff, I feel like it's so easy to get to the impressionable mind in college. You're just fresh out of high school, maybe you lack that translated mentorship, like an anchor. Like we all have a common mentor. Not everybody is fortunate in that way to have that set goal. But let's say from the lens of, or let's just say peer pressure. Let's call it peer pressure. What do you think the effect of your peers and different mentalities, in your experience even, just what do you think was that effect on your wanting to go straight through the straight and narrow?
I think honestly a lot of my peers, so I didn't have a lot of mentorship going into college. I didn't have a lot of experience. I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what my end goal was. I just didn't know how to get there in the best way possible. A lot of my peers, I think they actually were set on the fact that they wanted to do a gap year. So I didn't hear a lot of people oh, I'm gonna apply straight through. So I didn't really have to deal with that kind of peer pressure, which I think is interesting, because in my mind I was just that's the best way to go, straight through. But I think that this kind of the best thing to do, honestly, is kind of what we talked about in our last episode regarding mentorship, having either a network of people you can talk to and learn from, or just a mentor that you can learn from as well, and get their advice about what you should do, hear their experience. We were talking about how the mentors listen to us attentively, but I think it's also important to listen to their experiences. I don't know if that answered your question.
You know, I have written in my notes, one of the cons, quote unquote cons of the straight and narrow is the risk of burnout that presents. I think that is certainly a way to offset some of the burnout, is if you have that supportive, that social support of your network, and you have, it really comes down to social support, It comes down to people that support you in the decision that perhaps your family or even in your own, mental recourse, you're trying to justify a sort of dissonance that you have with where you are, where you want to be, or what you're thinking that you're doing. Maybe you're just confused, right? This is a common experience in college. You're confused about your ideal self, about your identity, where you project yourself in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. When you start to lose sight of that, just having the groundedness of people who can tell you, like, I've been through it, and, I get it, what you're going through. I'm certainly, not infallible of this. I've had moments in college, and I've discussed this in other episodes of, I was all over the place, man. I thought I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a police officer, a researcher, but I had to try it all to come back to, no, I actually want to be a doctor. I was right the whole time.
Yeah. I think college is like those years where you are supposed to like learn more about yourself, learn more about your wants, your needs, what you want to do in the future, like, and also just, figuring out yourself, which is why, like, if they're, someone's on a specific path and they, like, it's normal for paths to change. It's normal for you to, like, deter away from the path that you thought you were going to be on. And I think, like, it should be normalized.
I'll summarize the straight and narrow like this, and we'll move on to the 1 to 2 gap years conversation. So this is the small gap. So I would say, in summary, the straight and narrow has its pros and cons. I have listed, some of the pros. People cite academic momentum, finishing early, the opportunity cost of the physician's salary. Again, that academic momentum kind of goes hand in hand with still being in the mental study mode for the MCAT. Some cons being, fewer experiences, but it depends. It depends on your experience. So I would say to those straight and narrow, I would say apply when you're ready. And this is going to be the theme throughout this episode, is you're going to apply when you're ready. Some people are ready when they do this, some people aren't. Did you have anything you wanted to say to that?
Personally, I'm taking 3 gap years, including the time that I enter in. And the reason I did that, because I felt like I didn't have enough clinical experience. I had like other volunteering experiences, research and things like that, but I was like, you know what, I want to actually, have more time to see what it's like, see what the healthcare dynamic is like, see if this is truly something I want. Because once you enter in, like, that's like, you're making a decision, student loans are gonna come out. Like, you have to like make sure that this is something you really want to do. And then also it's like, I needed that clinical experience, and I feel like that changed a lot. It helped me come out of my shell, because I was like really shy when I was in undergrad. So like it helped my personal growth. So I think it really, it depends on the person.
So sure. A good segue, if you're one of the few that can manage the straight, and I would say it's ever increasingly becoming the few that can manage the straight and narrow, it's typically because you've been set up to do so already. I would say that's common. You're cued in on this. And if you're not, 1 to 2 gap years is perfectly acceptable, and it's becoming the norm, actually. So in those 1 to 2 gap years, or 3 gap years, we'll expand to include 3 gap years. Some of the cited reasons for doing these gap years, and I just pull these off of forums, but boost your stats, personal growth, earn/save money, and some of the semantics of that. For example, being an EMT, scribing, these are some of the aspects of clinical work. Lab tech, research assistant. We mentioned post-bac programs to improve some of your stats. Those are some specifics of that. You may volunteer abroad. Now, I have a specific note here. I caution the audience to be especially intentional when volunteering on medical missions abroad. It can seem especially contrived in some applications. Virtue signaling is the word that comes to mind. be careful when you set out to be intentional about activities that you do, because it's almost like a balance of intentionality versus authenticity. When you intentionally set out to do something virtuous, are you really being virtuous? Like, where is the impetus there? Is it to improve your application, or because you truly want to do something positive? The direct positive experience of applying, and I think it should be that, is always just reciprocally, we want to enrich ourselves to eventually show that to the admissions committee, who are then going to enrich us, further by letting us be doctors and be trained. But it's in articulating, and this is how we find these activities, in eventually articulating why medicine, and then into the why do I continue doing this once you're actually practicing it. But you got to know why, and you have to have an idea, and I think they vet for this. You have to have and they being admissions committees, you have to have an idea of, when you're there, what's the real deal like, right? So that's that clinical experience. If you don't have it, I think it's necessary. They say, like, these activities, are they necessary or are they not? This is the activity show that I wanted to do, leaking in here. But they say that those activities, are they necessary, are they not? They say, nothing's required. You do what you want to do. You do you, boo. But no, I think physician shadowing, clinical experience is necessary. What do you think?
I think shadowing, honestly, is really important, because that's where you really get to see, like, what a physician is doing the whole entire day. You get to see, kind of like, follow in their footsteps. I have had friends who switched from pre-med to pre-PA because they were like, oh, I shadowed a physician, a surgeon. I just didn't think it was for me, like, the level of work and time. And that's okay. Like, you can totally, like, switch to another path. I think that is really, being able to do that is honestly really admirable and really brave, because it takes a lot of courage to see, like, oh, I've been working towards a certain goal, but now I'm realizing it may not be right for me. So this is why I also, like, I really vouch for physician shadowing or clinical experience as well. Like, really see if that is what is meant for you, I think.
Yeah, especially shadowing, I feel like it really shows, like, the behind the scenes, and, like, oftentimes a lot of physicians will, like, really tell you, like, what are their struggles in their career, like, what are they missing out on, or, like, what do they feel like, is, like, what are they sacrificing to be there? And I feel like a lot of times, like, you don't really get that unless you get those experiences, for sure.
So I wanted to ask, we've both taken gap years. I wanted to ask, what do you think your gap years have contributed to your application? Why do I ask this? Because I think it's the common misconception from type A personalities, whether it be by how they were brought up or just how they are naturally. They're predisposed to think, gap years, I'm going to lose my momentum, I'm going to be seen as less competitive, lazy, all this different stigma that surrounds not being in school and perhaps not even working. But to that, I would attest, what are we doing now? This is what we're doing during our gap years. Can you kind of share that sentiment?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like, gap years often could get that rep, right? And honestly, what I would have to say to that is, like, if you are taking a gap year, you should kind of have an idea of what you want to do. If you're, like, 6 months into, like, the year of, like, your gap year, and you're just, kind of, like, trying to, like, be like, maybe I should, like, do a little volunteering, maybe I should do a little bit of this, maybe I should take a class, then maybe that might, like, end up taking that route of, like, well, are you using that time to, like, to your advantage? But oftentimes, like, individuals like me and you who are taking gap years, we are, like, actively doing something that betters ourselves and therefore, like, betters our application. So it's like we are adding more to our application, I believe so, by having those gap years, because these are, like, experiences that I didn't have when I was in undergrad, and I think admissions committee can definitely see that, and they just want more applicants with, like, real life experiences. And in my gap year with those clinical experiences, like, that has, like, allowed me to, like, have those. And I think, like, as long as, like, you know what you're trying to work towards and you're following your interests at the same time, even if it's not something, like, grand or big, like, you don't have to, like, do like super big things, but as long as, like, you're working towards, like, enhancing yourself or bettering yourself or adding more, like, I guess, experiences onto your belt that you otherwise wouldn't have, like social experiences, like interactions and like things like that, for sure.
I wanted to add, I agree 100% with what you're saying, that, man, I don't know about you guys, but undergrad really killed my creativity, man. Kind of bummed me out at some points. A lot of the time I was so fixated on the grind and the numbers, you know, let's raise more money for this club or this group, let's get better grades, let's, you know, time scales of projects and things like that. I needed to take a step back, and only after undergrad have I been able to explore more of my own creative side, from self-stigmatizing myself as a non-creative to then exploring creative avenues and realizing that maybe I have something to offer, which then, who knows, could be translated in future work as a physician or as a mentor, you know, in some capacity. Discovering more about yourself is a central crux, is a cardinal trait to the gap years, which I think is really important. And if you fix on that, I think you'll have a good time. as long as you are able to rationalize what you're doing as, this is enriching me, especially in some intellectual way. And in that sense, you'll never lose your academic momentum, because I feel sharper now than I did in undergrad. More well-rested, more well-learned. So really only benefits. And again, you know, the emotional mental maturity part is important. So the final I guess, category that I would distinguish would be the 3+, maybe even 5+ gap years. This is the non-traditional, as the forums like to call it. This is, I would say, prototypically, and if you're applying to medical school, someone who's shifting careers, whether it be from military to undergrad to medicine. You know, there's this guy online who was a Navy SEAL, and then he went into do we know what I'm talking about? Navy SEAL into medicine, into being an astronaut. You know,
wow, interesting.
the joke is that he can't hold a job. But typically, and in my experience, this is more like nurses and paramedics, maybe even PAs, who are changing careers going into medicine. I've heard even clinical psychologists going into medicine after years practicing clinical psych, finance, whatever, you know. Basically, something in that job, or perhaps they've always known that they wanted to go into medicine at some point, or, you know, it's always been in the back of their mind. But what do you think about that? I mean, I really see it as a positive. Like, if you've made it to that point, it's just that for us, we already know, right? So it's not something that you go seeking, which I think it makes it unique. Melody had something to say.
I think it shows their dedication and passion. I think there's like that fear that we hear, like, oh, like, you know, you're going to be a doctor, you know, if you take like 10 gap years, you're going to be a doctor when you're 40, maybe even more, or late 30s. And that like scares a lot of people. And that's why they usually like typically take gap years that are probably 1 to 2 years or no gap years. But I think just like knowing a person knowing that they want to do something, no matter how long it takes, like if they have to take a few, you know, if they are going late into the program, into medical school.
I would say, as an aside, who I would not recommend this pathway to is somebody who has taken their pre-med specific coursework. Then don't try and go, you know, take 10+ gap years, because your coursework will expire.
Yeah.
The same thing with the MCAT, it can expire, and then you'll need to do it all again.
I know people who, like, they came from like another country and they've taken all their prereqs, they graduated, and then coming into US, they're just like waiting on for their MCAT or waiting for like their visa. Like, there's a lot of circumstances that like play a role into it. Truly, like, I think it like depends on the person. Some people can do it, some people can't do it. It really comes down to the person and like what their experience is. But honestly, the biggest thing I've learned from my whole entire experience as a pre-med is that you're gonna end up in the same spot. It's just like everyone has a different path. It depends on the path you're taking.
The time goes on no matter what.
Exactly. Like, you maybe, you know, for me, I didn't think I would be taking a gap year, maybe 2, and now like I'm at that point, and I'm okay with that because I know I'm gonna get there at the end of the day. It's just a different path, and that's okay. Yeah.
Stick with it. Keep
no,
pushing.
definitely. I think often, like, you know, people who do take a lot of gap years, like you said, they're switching career paths, and like sometimes like it is important to like it well I mean it is important to be, you know, wary of like the coursework and when that expires and doesn't. It really depends on the school, so make sure if you're like in that path, like going towards that direction, like you are like checking those things and sort of somewhat have an idea of like what schools you want to apply to, because some schools are like, oh, like you need to have like your last coursework should have been 5 years ago,
Or
and
they
some
even,
schools are like 10
UCLA
years.
voids coursework. They don't even take a specific course curriculum anymore.
Oh really?
Yeah, I believe David Geffen now, they don't require specific classwork. Yeah.
Yeah, so it really depends on the school. Like I know someone who took 5 gap years, just, you know, working as an EMT in the hospital and like hadn't taken like a coursework in a while. But, you know, again, like what their like experiences brought to their application, like was really what got him in.
Only to your benefit, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big pro of the, if that happens to be you, and I think it does, like you were saying, it's kind of, a good chunk of it is mediated by that circumstantial evidence.
Yeah.
Is do we go looking for 5+ gap years? Probably not. You know, if we're being intentional about applying to medical school, like us, we're not going to go looking for 5+ gap years. It may fall into our lap, but not going to go looking for it. Some, they just need that time because they weren't sure, you know, from the get-go, or they had something that they were looking for, right? Perhaps like the funny example of the guy who was a Navy SEAL, right? He probably didn't think I'm going to go into medicine, or maybe he did. But yeah, just things like that, you know. So in conclusion, I would say that there is no perfect timeline. There is no perfect time scale to apply to medical school. You apply when you're ready. You know that you're ready because you have the experience that informs your why medicine. You ideally have some physician shadowing, so you know exactly what you're getting into. You know the semantic details. And you have that confidence in yourself that, you know, you get to this point where it's like, you know, if these schools don't accept me, somebody will. Like, I'm good enough, right? And
Trust yourself.
Trust yourself. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Sadaya Dانشجو, and until next time.